Good afternoon and welcome to another Institute of Health Studies satellite seminar. I'm Ray Jones, Director of Research for the Institute of Health Studies, and with me in the University of Plymouth TV studios today we're very pleased to welcome Di Millen from the NHS Information Authority. She's working with and we'll be talking about the NHSU. We also welcome Teresa Doherty, who is NHSU Assistant Divisional Head for the South West region, who's come to join Di in the discussion. In the studio with Di and Teresa, we also have Ros Jowett from the Institute of Health Studies and Sue Hodgetts from the Workforce Development Confederation, who will introduce themselves when we come to the discussion. Similarly, I will not say any more about Di Millen just now, but leave her to explain her role within her presentation. We're hoping that we will have an audience in various parts of the South West and perhaps in other parts of the country, such as Nottingham and Glasgow. Although we can't be sure you're there, so while Di is giving her presentation, I would like someone from your site to phone the studio on 01752 233 646. That telephone number will be given again later. Don't worry about the phone ringing down here, it won't. You'll get through to Dave or Zoe, your colleagues in the control room, and you can just say, for example, this is Nottingham watching and we've got 8 people here. Or you can email me directly. I have a laptop in front of me, and tell me that you're there on tvstudio@plymouth.ac.uk. Again, just to register who's watching. I know, for example, that there should be a class of nursing students watching in Plymouth, so it would be nice to get an email from you. This will be very helpful for us so that we can make this seminar as interactive as possible. So now we go over to Di Millen, but please do be thinking of comments and questions during our presentation so that we can get your contribution when she joins us here afterwards.
Thank you very much, Ray. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to present to you today. I'm delighted to be here. I am currently on a half-time secondment working with the NHSU, helping to establish what we're calling for the time being a Faculty of Health Informatics. My day job is actually working for the NHS Information Authority, as Ray mentioned, where I'm leading the work there on professionalism in health informatics, with a job title that's too long and boring to bother you with for now. So that's why I'm here. I'm going to talk to you about the NHSU in general, and I'm going to talk specifically a little about the health informatics offering, because that's something that clearly is dear to my heart. Before I do that, I just feel I should point out that on the opening slide this afternoon, the heading was Learning for Everyone, the NHS University. We're not a university yet. I'm going to mention that in my presentation, but we're calling ourselves NHSU, and I think that's important to point out right from the start. So, NHSU, what's it all about? Why do we need it? Well, the NHS today is modernising. None of us who work in the NHS can have avoided the fact that the NHS is modernising its services, its processes, it's using technology in new ways to enhance patient care, to improve the patient journey. And if we're going to continue to modernise and achieve the objectives set out in the National Plan and other national strategies and policies, we have to embrace learning and transformation in learning. Learning is for everybody in the NHS. There are groups of staff, and I'm sure we're all familiar with them, who in the past have not had access to learning in the same kind of way that some of the professional groups, like clinicians, have. So NHSU has to do something about improving equity in access to learning if everybody's part in improving the patient journey is to be appreciated and developed. NHSU is about helping to coordinate and encourage economies of scale. We all know that training is delivered and developed in dozens of ways across learning centres, in training departments and outside the NHS. And the NHSU has to have a role in helping to coordinate that and to bring about some kind of benefit from economy of scale. So, NHSU is going to be about supporting the priorities of the NHS as a whole. It's about, and we must never forget this of course, contributing to the systematic improvement of patient care. If NHSU doesn't do that, then it will have failed to achieve a significant objective. How we measure that, of course, is another challenge for us. And you may have some views on how we might do that. And very importantly, NHSU is about unlocking people's talents and creating new learning opportunities. Learning is not just about attending courses. NHSU will encourage innovation in learning and encourage learning in the workplace in new and different ways. So, one of the important things NHSU will do, and this is radical, it's going to be difficult, but NHSU aims to include patients and carers more effectively in learning for people who work in the NHS, but also in helping to develop patients and carers in ways that we haven't done before. One of the things I think that has become clear to us as we've been holding seminars and presentations around the country, and again I'll say more about that later, is that NHSU is already appearing to be a catalyst for innovation. People are starting to think and talk about learning and development in ways that perhaps they haven't done before. People from different disciplines, from higher education, further education, the NHS, and private suppliers are starting to talk about innovation in learning and how that might bring about change in learning cultures in the NHS. Now, NHSU aims to be a corporate university for the NHS, but importantly, a corporate university with a difference. But what is a corporate university? Well, there are lots of dictionary definitions, but it may help to explain that large organisations like Barclays, the bank, Microsoft, and even McDonald's have corporate universities. Corporate universities are about providing an explicit focus on learning and development for employees and others working with a particular corporation or organisation. Learning and development focuses expressly on the aims and values of that organisation. So the NHSU will strive to support learning about NHSU culture and values. And importantly, corporate universities focus on reorientation of the business. And if we're to modernise the service, I think we all understand that changes in working practice have to take place. They're happening all the time already. So NHSU, as a corporate university, will support modernisation, will support new ways of working, new ways of doing things. And that's not just in administrative terms, but in terms of clinical care, clinical processes. Importantly, a corporate university champions investment in skills, competencies, qualities and self-esteem of staff. NHSU can be an agitator. I hope it will be. I hope it will stimulate discussion. I hope it will stimulate debate about resource, about direction of travel and about investment in human resources in terms of education, training and development. And importantly, NHSU, as a corporate university, has to strive to make learning normal by building it into working lives. As I said earlier, learning isn't just about attending courses. We learn all the time in everything we do in the workplace. We have to find ways of measuring that, capturing that, and appreciating it in ways that perhaps we haven't done before. So, where are we now? How have we got to today? In June 2001, the Labour Party manifesto for the first time alluded to something called the NHSU. I think it may have actually alluded to something called the NHS University. But that was the first inclination that we had, that there was going to be some serious political investment in creating an organisation to support learning and development across the service. In October of that year, an initial prospectus was launched. It was called Everyone. Some of you may have found it. It was on the web. It was just a short document setting out an overview of the vision for the NHSU. In February 2002, Chief Executive Bob Fryer was appointed and a small team of people were put in place. That team grew between February and June of that year to include many people like me on part-time secondments charged with undertaking work in specific areas to move the agenda forwards. And I think the team got up to something like 40 at one point, all working, most people working part-time. Between March and October, the development plan, Learning for Everyone, was developed, and I hope some of you will have had the opportunity to see that. At the end of my presentation, I'm going to give you the address of the NHSU website, so if you haven't seen it already, you can do so. It's quite a chunky document, but there's a summary as well, if you don't feel like wading through the whole plan. But that plan was produced to support a major activity, major exercise around consultation. And that started in November. And again, I hope some of you out there will actually have participated in some of our workshops and contributed to the development plan consultation. The consultation has been a genuine attempt to capture what it is people out in the service, in higher education, in the supplier side, feel about NHSU, genuinely concerned to collect ideas, suggestions, comments, criticisms about the proposal set out in the development plan. That consultation exercise has now ended, and I understand that there's a small team of people now gathering together what have been hundreds of responses to the plan. They've come electronically, they've come in writing, and all the information gathered from the consultation events, the workshops themselves, all that data is being gathered by organisations like MORI and will be fed into the resulting document. So, who is NHSU for? It's a question that everybody asks, quite rightly. In a nutshell, it's for everyone who works in the NHS. It's also for anyone who works for the NHS, and that's important. So we're not only talking here about people who are directly employed by the NHS, but people also on contract, and that includes cleaning, catering staff and clinicians. But there's a gradually extending to on that slide, and the ambition is to extend its remit to cover staff working in social care and ultimately patients and carers as well. I hope you can see from this that this is a significant challenge, and I'm hoping that some of you will have comments, particularly perhaps about how NHSU might work with and benefit patients and carers, because I think that is going to be a particular challenge for us. Remember that the NHS has 1.3 million employees, and the NHSU aims to provide something that will be of benefit and interest to all of those people, as well as those working in social care and outside. The development plan talks about 8 guiding principles for the NHS, and I think these are important. These for me are the foundations of everything that NHSU has to do, and anything we plan, anything we develop has to be mapped back onto these principles to make sure that we are along the right tracks. So these principles are access. This is about making sure that everybody in the NHS has appropriate access to appropriate programmes to support their personal and professional development, but importantly targeted towards meeting the organisation's needs. So this doesn't mean that everybody can have access to anything they want. There clearly has to be prioritisation, there has to be planning. Learning and development has to be relevant, and NHSU has to make sure that all its offerings are relevant, that they meet targets, objectives, and generally support the modernisation agenda. Users of NHSU service must have choice. They must have choice about how they learn, when they learn, where they learn, and what they learn. We all have different learning styles and preferences. Sometimes it's good for us to move outside our comfort zone and try something that's new or different, but actually NHSU has to provide choice for people as far as possible, and importantly provide support for learners. There's been much discussion at the consultation events and other presentations that I've attended about e-learning and the use of e-learning within the NHSU's delivery platform. You know, what does it really mean? And I think one of the things that's come home very clearly from discussions with people out in the service and in education organisations is that e-learning on its own is not an answer, it's not a complete solution. It's part of a jigsaw, it's part of what has to be a range of modes of learning. But if you are a remote learner, if you're using e-learning, you need support. All learners need support, but particularly important for those people who otherwise would not have it. So NHSU is committed to providing support for learners in different ways, and face-to-face support, mentoring support are key elements of our objectives. Equity to learning is important. I've mentioned already the fact that groups of staff in the NHS have in the past felt excluded from opportunities to learn and develop. And we have perhaps wasted talent and lost staff who have not felt valued or have not had opportunities to progress in a chosen career pathway. So NHSU has to ensure equity of access and, very importantly, a multidisciplinary and multi-professional approach to learning to help break down professional barriers, to encourage new ways of working, collaboration and better understanding of each other's roles and responsibilities. Partnership is a cornerstone of everything NHSU plans to do. I'll say a little bit more about partnership later, but partnership means working with existing providers, with the service and with anybody who is interested in helping NHSU achieve its objectives. But none of this will work unless it's of an appropriate quality, and NHSU is committed to quality in everything it does. So, I know you're dying to know what some of the early programmes and services are going to be. Well, there are a range of early programmes which NHSU plans to provide, and the first one, and it's the only one that NHSU has been told it has to provide for the launch at the end of this year, and that's an induction programme for everybody who works in the NHS. The induction programme will provide the basis for further learning in health organisations. It's not intended to replace, but rather to complement induction programmes that are currently run in individual health organisations, quite rightly. But it will introduce new employees to the service, to the NHS's culture and values, its structure, its organisation and its principles. And there's some interesting work going on at the moment by two developers to create a programme to achieve those objectives. So that will be available, may not be available everywhere from November the 1st or whatever the chosen date for our launch is. It may not be available everywhere to everyone, but over time the induction programme will be there and will be, I hope, a flexible product that can be used in a number of ways to support learning in health organisations. There will be a programme on communication skills. The induction programme will include a basic module on communication skills, but there will be a more advanced communication skills programme. There will be an offering around skills for life, literacy and numeracy. The proportion of citizens of the UK who would benefit from some kind of basic literacy and numeracy training, I understand, is immense. It's a significant proportion. It's something like 34% of the population. So I think we can assume that something like 30% of the NHS employees would benefit from the same kind of skills training. So that will be available through NHSU. There will be a programme on first contact in primary care. There will be a programme around health informatics, and I'm going to say more about that later. A programme on infection control and hygiene for cleaning staff is currently actually being run as a pilot. That will be available. We are migrating into the NHSU portfolio the Managing Health and Social Care programme, some of you may know as MeSol, Managing Health Services, and we hope to be able to have available some foundation degrees. In addition, there will be information, advice and guidance. There will be some e-learning, although I have to say that the e-learning platform that you see when we launch in November, I suspect will be very different from that which is eventually put in place. Work is underway to specify and develop the business case for, and then go out to tender for an e-learning platform for NHSU. Learner support networks are being planned and put in place. There will be an embryonic qualifications and accreditation framework, and colleagues are also working on a learning needs observatory which will gather data from across the NHSU divisions about what key learning needs are, and that will help inform its programme of development and delivery. Other items that we're hoping to be able to have on offer soon, if not in the initial portfolio soon after, something around junior scholarships. This is about providing opportunities for 14 to 16-year-olds to learn about the NHS, to encourage them to move into the NHS for a career, and then for them to stay and learn and develop and become NHS staff of the future through NHSU. And NHSU fellowships, a scheme is being developed looking at how NHSU might provide fellowships for people working in the service. So there's a lot to do between now and November. Partnership was one of the 8 principles that I mentioned, and just to give you a feel for the kind of organisations that NHSU is already working with, clearly NHS organisations and workforce development confederations, trade unions and professional bodies, schools, colleges, universities, and other strategic partnerships with organisations such as the Open University, the UK's e-University, University for Industry, and my employing organisation, the NHS Information Authority. NHSU cannot achieve its objectives without the collaboration and partnership with this kind of organisation. I'm going to say a little bit more about what that might mean in practice, I think, during my next slide, because I think there are some principles of delivery which are important to highlight at this stage. I think I may be anticipating some of your questions when I talk about these delivery principles. Firstly, I want to mention NHSU's vision of how it will actually work in partnership and deliver programmes in practice. NHSU is not going to be a provider of taught courses in a conventional sense. It does not intend to develop a large portfolio of taught programmes. These principles form a hierarchy. Initially, first and foremost, NHSU will act as a broker. It will broker existing programmes, it will broker existing opportunities, and to do that it has to clearly work in partnership. Where it is not possible to broker, where there's a gap in existing provision, NHSU will commission, and again that has to be done in partnership. NHSU will be working with providers in further and higher education and private sector organisations and others to commission initiatives, programmes to help plug gaps. And ultimately, if it can do it no other way, NHSU will get involved in direct delivery. But as I said, that's a hierarchy. NHSU will structure itself around regional divisions. We now have in place 9 divisional heads based on the Regional Development Agency areas. Teresa Doherty, who's in the studio with us today, is Assistant Divisional Head in the South West. So the divisions are charged with networking, developing partnerships, putting infrastructure in place within those 9 divisions to make the NHSU vision a reality. There will be a national headquarters. Where that is, at the moment we're not absolutely sure, but there will be a national headquarters, and the aspiration is to be able to develop over time a facility that will allow residential accommodation and teaching facility. So there'll be a small number of staff in the national headquarters and a network of divisional heads and support staff working with health organisations and others in partnership. NHSU will adopt a blended learning approach to providing learning opportunities and supporting learners. I've mentioned the e-learning platform. I've mentioned the fact that that in itself is not going to be adequate. So NHSU will endeavour to offer flexible opportunities for learning in ways that meet individual learners' needs. And I guess that was my last point really. NHSU will add value to what's already there and brokering what's already there by helping to provide local support for learners in all sorts of different ways. And if you have specific questions about that, I suspect Teresa's the person to talk to. Ultimately, NHSU wants to provide academic credit for its learners and to achieve university status. So we can't call ourselves NHS University yet, we're not. There's a journey to be had, there's a pathway that we have to tread, and it's not going to happen overnight. But the vision for NHSU is that it will become a chartered university and award its own credit where appropriate. There are some tough issues that I've alluded to in my presentation to date, and I'd be very surprised if some of you aren't burning to ask me questions about making time to learn, for example. How will NHSU make time to learn a reality? Well, I'd say first of all, and again preempting questions I suspect, NHSU can't do it on its own. This is not just an issue for NHSU, it's an issue for the NHS, it's an issue for WDCs, it's an issue for the Human Resources Division at the Department of Health and others. It's about changing culture, and it's about identifying ways to encourage learning in the workplace that don't necessarily mean moving out of the workplace to learn. The second question you're going to ask me is about who pays. How much is it all going to cost? I wish I had the answer. I don't. There will be different answers depending on the programme, the solution, the course, the opportunity that's being provided. And many of the comments, many of the questions that we've had at the consultation events have been around just this issue. How do we actually make a reality of widening participation? That's going to be a huge challenge for us. And I suspect that our colleagues, my colleagues working out in the divisions, are going to have a tough job on their hand to make participation in NHSU activity across all groups, grades and disciplines a reality. But it will happen over time. It's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen over time. How exactly is all this going to be delivered in practice? Some of the things I've talked about are fine in theory, but we've got to find ways of delivering all of this in practice, of supporting learners, providing people with time. And maybe you've got some ideas that could help us here. What are our targets going to be? How do we measure, how will we measure success? And again, your suggestions would be extremely helpful here, because it simply isn't going to be enough to count the number of students that have registered on the NHSU website, for example. How else can NHSU measure its success? And ultimately, how is NHSU to achieve university title and status? Indeed, should it even strive to do so? And I know that there are some strong views out there about this. In the last few minutes of my presentation, I want to run through the health informatics offering that we're planning for the launch of the NHSU in the autumn. We have been talking about a faculty of health informatics, and I've put quote marks around that because the word faculty has specific connotations, and there are sensitivities around the use of that label. It may be called a school, it may be called a department, or should it indeed simply be an embedded, interwoven theme, integral to everything that NHSU offers. And there's a debate to be had about that. I have my personal view, but you may have a view about that too. What kind of management structure should any faculty, school or division in NHSU have? And that's an issue that we are going to thrash out by using health informatics as an example. Very importantly, from my perspective, the Faculty of Health Informatics is being established in partnership with the NHS Information Authority and the National Education, Training and Development Programme. Sorry about that, slip of the thumb. There are other stakeholders involved in helping us look at what the Faculty of Health Informatics should look like. And I would really value your input into this. We need to know what it is NHSU can do for you in health informatics, education, training and development terms. How can we add value to what's already there? How can we plug gaps in the market? I think there's a real opportunity here for people who work in health informatics, for people who have an interest in health informatics, to provide learning opportunities, to encourage the service, to understand better what health informatics is all about and the importance of information in the improvement of patient care. So, when you visit the NHSU website, hopefully at the end of October, beginning of November, you will find a health informatics learning needs analysis tool, a web-based tool that will enable you to extract a skills profile for a particular job role. It might be the job you're doing now, it might be a job that you hope to do in the future, and it will tell you what it is you need to be able to know and do about health informatics. You will then be encouraged to map your current levels of skill and knowledge onto that profile, which will result in a gap analysis. So what? You found out what it is you need to know, but how are you going to plug the gaps? There will be attached, seamlessly available through the tool, a database of tools, courses and resources. So for every gap that's identified, there will be a signpost to somewhere, something or someone to help you meet that need. And in that, around all of that, will be a web-based environment. So, what else? We are looking at ECDL, the European Computer Driving Licence, and how that might be managed into NHSU, or what the relationship between NHSU and the Information Authority's ECDL programme should be. We are considering how NHSU might help accredit learning which is currently being offered for clinical coding trainers, clinical coders, primary care information facilitators and others. There are lots of opportunities out there to accredit programmes that currently do not attract credit. The other things we're looking at are foundation degrees in health informatics, possibly, a short course in analysing and presenting data and information, how the NHSU can support librarian development, information appraisal, and the development of information skills in primary care. Importantly, how can all of this fit in with the National Electronic Library for Health and the embryonic virtual branch library in health informatics? This slide and the previous slide set out some thinking. It's no more than that. And I would really appreciate your input, as I said earlier, into helping prioritise some of these things and identify others that you think we've not considered or should be there in an early health informatics faculty. So you can send your views on the NHS development plan and the kind of direction I've outlined for you today to this email address, yourviews@nhsu.nhs.uk. You can telephone the 0800 number there on the screen, and you can email me personally if you want to discuss anything I've said or talk about health informatics specifically. That's my email address and my mobile phone number. Thank you very much.
Well, don't wait until later. Do it now. Don't phone or email Di. Phone or email us right now so that you can get your comments and questions to Di. So we're waiting for your phone calls. In the meantime, Sue, you're going to kick off some discussion here.
Absolutely. Sue Hodgetts, Chief Executive of the Workforce Development Federation for Devon and Cornwall Di. Very interested and pleased to hear about the NHSU. Obviously, being a workforce development confederation, we have had some contact already with the NHSU, which is very pleasing in terms of ensuring that we don't duplicate. Certainly I would support a lot of the principles that you're talking about, equality of access, and particularly that coordination role to avoid duplication of effort, etc. There is going to be, or there is potentially going to be, some crossover between our two organisations, and I just wondered if you had any views about how we could avoid that, both duplication of effort, duplication of provision, and duplication of funding. And I think if you've got any answers to that or any ideas about where we go from that, I'd be very grateful to hear them.
I wish I did. I wish I had the answers. The trouble with a presentation like this is that it always raises many questions, and because NHSU is a very embryonic organisation, many of the issues that you're going to raise, I can't give you a straight answer to. I'd suggest that now we have our divisional heads in place, certainly at a local level, there's a very important dialogue has to take place between NHSU and the WDCs and health organisations. But equally, those discussions have to happen at a national level. And one of the things that I didn't mention in my presentation, but which is, I think, an issue that we're going to have to tackle soon, is getting the balance right between NHSU divisional activity and NHSU national activity.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a great believer in dialogue, and I think as long as we start to talk to each other and identify the problems, we will find answers and solutions. But you're right, there is a risk, but we have to have a dialogue.
I mean, I'm sure you know we have responsibility for both pre and post registration training. We have contracts with higher education and further education and the Open University. And so I guess it's just about keeping that dialogue open so that we don't get confusion both with our stakeholders but also in our organisations as well.
I mean, again, it's probably worth mentioning that NHSU does not intend to get involved at this stage in pre-registration training. But it will have an important role in post-registration in continuous professional development, etc.
And hopefully some of those gaps will be filled.
And hopefully NHSU can act as that kind of umbrella to help make sense of what's happening at a local and national level.
Can I bring Ros Jarrett in? Yeah, Ros,
Thank you. Yes, Di. Rosalind Jarrett from the University of Plymouth. The four themes that you mentioned, or four principles, I think, were access, relevance, choice and support. And to my knowledge, there are approximately 76 universities already engaged in healthcare provision. So how is the NHSU going to work with we think we're already looking at that. We feel that part of our remit is about access, relevance, support and choice. So how are you going to work with us to ensure there isn't duplication or unnecessary repetition?
Well, again, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, we've talked about partnership, but what does that mean in practice? Partnership can mean lots of different things. I think, in answer to your question, I'd say that NHSU has got to develop its brokerage role, importantly. And I hope that eventually NHSU will become a kind of single point of access for people who want to find out what's out there. And certainly that's one of the objectives of the web-based learning needs assessment tool we're developing for health informatics and the database of tools, courses and resources. It's a way of bringing together information about what's already being provided in higher education, further education, commercially, making it accessible to people, telling them what's available, where to go to get it.
Can I sort of jump? I mean, why is there a need for that though? Because I mean, surely, I mean, for example, if take the nursing courses or the medical school courses, I mean, surely people already know what's out there, and you know, why do you need somebody else coming in saying what's there?
Well, I'm talking specific.
We're already competing. And how would NHSU, for example, give information about, say, a course being offered by Plymouth versus a course being offered by rivals Bournemouth or Bath or something else?
Well, the database I'm talking about is specifically about health informatics programs. And I think that is a difficult area. Firstly, people don't know what health informatics means. It means different things to different people. So by giving access to a full range of programs that bear the umbrella label health informatics, hopefully will help to demystify it as a subject, firstly. But it's very difficult for somebody out there to find out just what's available to meet their needs in health informatics terms. There is no single source of information about that. Now, I think you were alluding to a question of quality and whether NHSU might be approving certain programs or recommending certain things. And certainly initially we can't do that because we don't have a quality framework in place. But over time, it may well be that NHSU will jointly badge, will kite mark other partners' programmes if they meet the appropriate quality framework standards. But it's a very, health informatics is a very different kind of world at the moment from some of the programmes I think you've been mentioning. And our offering is being tailored to meet a specific need in the health informatics domain. It may not be applicable across other divisions or faculties as they develop.
Sorry to interrupt. Can we come back to you in a minute, Ros? We have got an email from Plymouth here, and I would like to take some of the questions from Plymouth. I'll tell you all three questions, and you can come back to them, Guy. First one is: given that the core principles, aims, and many of the hang on, I'm going to close something out of the way here. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. I need to go to an informatics course.
Damn technology.
Right, start again. Given that the core principles, aims, and many of the programmes delivered mirror what current universities and learning centres currently offer, what extra will NHSU offer over and above these current providers? That is, specific examples of added value. I'll do all three questions. Second one is: given that you have piloted a number of sites, how have you been measuring success? And the third one is: how are you going to address the time and resources issue for staff currently in the NHS? We would like to have some specific examples, they say. Thank you. Thank you, Plymouth.
Thank you, Plymouth. Just remind what the first question was.
First one was, given the core principles, aims, and many of the programmes delivered, what extra will NHSU offer over and above current providers?
Okay. Well, NHSU will firstly help to identify gaps in existing provision. It doesn't aim to provide or deliver or compete with existing programmes where they are already in place. But I turn the question back to you actually and say, what do you think NHSU can provide in the way of added value? It may be advice about learning pathways, it may be learner support at a local level, it may be accreditation. There may be all sorts of things NHSU can do in the way of brokering existing programmes that would add value to the users. But NHSU will identify gaps in current provision, and the kind of things that I ran through that will be in our initial portfolio, like the control of infection for cleaning staff programme, the first contact in primary care programme, they are gaps in existing provision, and that's where NHSU's market will be, I think. I don't know whether Teresa must chip in if she wants to add anything here, because
I think one of the things that on a local basis, which is what we're here for, is that to work closely with the WDCs and the FE and the HEs to identify the local learning communities and establish what is already there in a systematic way. And one of the things we're going to do is a mapping exercise, so that we'll have information that when the NHSU programmes are available, we can then identify where these gaps are, so we're not causing a duplication in the resource that we're hoping to provide, and look at also provision in a more flexible way, not within the workplace, maybe not necessarily within HE or FE.
I mean, that perhaps brings us on to that third point, which maybe Sue also has some comments on this point about how you're going to address the time and resource issues for staff currently in the NHS. I guess what they're getting at there is the fact that staff don't have time to go on training education anyway, and we have great difficulties getting them out. Does anybody want to pick that up?
Well, I think I said in my presentation that learning isn't always about going out of the workplace. NHSU is committed to recognising or to encouraging others to recognise the value of learning in the workplace, first and foremost. It is not an issue that NHSU on its own can resolve. It's a general issue for the NHS. It's about changing attitudes to learning. It's about being flexible. It's about embedding learning into everything we do in the service. And there have to be discussions with Human Resources Division at the department and others about that as a general principle for the NHS as a whole. If nothing else, I think NHSU has a role in kind of agitating about this, about stimulating discussion and about stimulating change, but it cannot change the culture of the NHS in this respect on its own. But I know if Bob Fryer were here, he would say this isn't just about taking people out of the workplace, but it's about encouraging learning in the workplace and recognising the value of learning that takes place in the workplace as well.
I mean, I know you're very, very acutely aware of the capacity issues in the NHS in terms of there's not enough people in the right places at the right time with the right skills, and hence an awful lot of work is going on, particularly locally, around skill mix, around changing roles, and supporting that changing roles with some education and training that's appropriate to make that role different to actually meet the modern NHS. I mean, my interest lies in how we accredit the training and the roles that go with that. And I know that, I mean, Ros and I have constant debates about speeding up the process in terms of accrediting that education and training. I can presume, perhaps, that the NHS might play a part, NHSU will play a part in some of that accreditation.
I think that's absolutely right. We've now got a couple of people actually in post looking at the quality and accreditation framework and trying to build our response to that kind of question.
And do you have a framework, a time framework for that?
No, I mean, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
But I mean,
can I just bring in, I mean, I've got another email back from Plymouth, and by the way, I know that there are people in Exeter and Trelist there watching because you phoned in to tell us, so do get that phone out again and phone us in again. In the meantime, Plymouth are outdoing you quite well here. We've got another email in saying, why not use a facility such as the NELHA, the National Electronic Library for Health, to act as a gateway for signposting information, courses and so on, rather than developing an entirely new university?
Well, we do have to work very closely with the National Electronic Library for Health. If you think of a conventional university, it would have a library. But importantly, we have a network of libraries across the NHS, in hospitals, in health organisations, in postgraduate organisations, and all those have to be brought into this infrastructure as well. We are talking to the National Electronic Library for Health about how we can make access to both NHSU offerings and NELH offerings seamless. That's all I can say. I mean, I think NELH has a particular kind of platform. NHSU is developing another kind of platform, but they will meld together, and there should be seamless connection between them.
Sorry, could I just come back? Thank you for clarifying the aspect about pre-registration learning and programmes. You mentioned about post-qualifying or yes, I think you did, but what about postgraduate and particularly master's level studies? Yes. What is the NHS views on that? Its aspiration is to develop postgraduate level programmes. Right. Certainly. As an example, and this is an example not of delivery but of brokerage and partnership, in health informatics terms, we've been talking to the providers of master's level programmes in health and medical informatics to say how can we make better sense of existing provision, because it's a relatively specialist area. Not many students and many courses fail because they can't recruit adequate numbers to make themselves viable. So NHSU is talking now to some of the providers, and we've got a group in the north of England who are interested in working with us and piloting something to look at how we can make master's level provision flexible, modular, and have some kind of common credit framework. So maybe that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Right, thank you.
Okay, can I pick up on one thing which is dear to my heart from research? Yes. The development plan for NHSU, which we've got there, which everyone's got to comment on, by the way. You can comment by, you've got about a week left to comment, is that right? So any comments got to be in by next week, I think?
I think it's actually finished.
I think technically, I think the data's technically ended.
Has it?
But don't worry. I mean, it's never too late. We're not.
Phone in now. Research. I mean, it seems to have got aspirations for research, and yet there's very limited research funds available. We're all competing like mad for the few research funds we've got. We've got the RAE pressing down on us, trying to put most of us out of business in doing research. Why bring another competitor in? Probably one who's got an unfair advantage over the rest of us.
Pragmatically, the development plan has to talk about a research capacity. If NHSU aspires to become a chartered university, it has to have a research capacity, or it did until the recent white paper came out, and I think that's another debate to be had maybe. But I would be very surprised if NHSU did not adopt the same kind of delivery principles around research as it will around other kind of programmes and activities, and that's brokerage, commissioning, and ultimately doing it only if there's no alternative. And I think NHSU...
I mean, we've got, how many commissioners have we got at the moment? We've got the SDO, we've got HTA, we've got, I mean, how many more commissioners do we need? I mean,
well, maybe NHSU should have a key role in helping to coordinate some of that activity. But it's the kind of thing that we need your feedback to from the development plan. You know, it's a minefield, I recognise that. And certainly in my specialist area of health informatics, we've tried to get the different research bodies together to make some sense, to get some dialogue going between the NHS and the research institutes about priorities, to try and make sense of the funding. And, you know, perhaps one of the things you should be saying to us is that NHSU should have a role in doing that.
I've got somebody, we've got Margaret in Exeter has been hanging on the phone for quite a little while now, so perhaps we can bring Margaret in with your question, please.
Hello, I'm one of the midwifery lecturers in Exeter, and we've been discussing amongst ourselves that apparently at the moment it seems that the NHSU is going to be largely a resource and information for the NHS staff. And we were just wondering what proposals there are for any sort of training programmes, for any category of staff. We've been trying to get our minds a little bit broader than just thinking in terms of the nursing midwifery programmes we have at present, and thinking of the wider NHS employees. And what sort of training programmes do you anticipate doing through the university, and if so, when?
Okay. There was one slide in my presentation that set out what the initial portfolio will comprise. And there's some very practical courses in that, around control of infection for cleaning staff, around first contact for primary care nurses. There's one that actually wasn't on my slide, which is around pre-operative assessment, which is being managed in. So those are three very practical programmes of learning. There will be others, I'm quite sure. What we're doing currently is concentrating on getting everything ready for November, and starting to plan beyond that. But we need your thoughts and suggestions. I'm genuine about that. I think we need to know what it is that you would value and what would be helpful. There will clearly be within NHSU a structure for determining, a process for determining what its curriculum should be, what its portfolio should be, and what its priorities should be. But there has to be feedback with partners, with the service, to help inform all of that.
Can I just say, I think that's where the local division will come in through working in partnership with the various learning communities, which in Devon and Cornwall would be the local workforce development groups, and then in Somerset and Avon, Gloucester and Wiltshire with the new academies that are being set up. It's about identifying the local need as much as the national need, and wherever possible identifying best practice, maybe considering piloting it, getting it onto a different footing, and then perhaps piloting and rolling this out on a national basis. But all this will take time, but we will have the role of feeding back into the learning observatory as to how new programmes develop.
I mean, I'm just wondering whether I may ask another question that, I suppose, building on Ray's question about the competitiveness of research monies. Is there a danger, or I think there is a concern actually, put it that way, that higher education institutions may think that some of their current monies could be top sliced or reduced in order to fund the NHSU. Is there any truth in underlying that concern?
I can't give you a straight answer to that because we just don't know.
Right. We
really don't know.
You can understand our concern.
Absolutely, yes, certainly can, yes. I mean, it may be the converse happens, of course, that NHSU stimulates demand and therefore is able to secure additional funding from the centre.
Well, that would be good.
That would be nice, wouldn't it? And certainly that may well apply in the research domain as well. Right. If NHSU can justify additional resource being made available, then maybe that will happen. But we just don't know.
Right.
So you want to come back in?
Where an obvious area for me where you can really add value in terms of the learning environment is around e-learning and providing that coordinated approach towards e-learning. And every organisation in the NHS, so I'm sure you know, has a requirement to have an e-learning policy.
Yeah.
Where are you in any of this? I mean, this is very current. It's needed now, and you know what I hear you say. Yes, we'll do it, but it'll take time. And what's going to go on in the meantime? Are people going to go off at tangents? Is there going to be a lot of different activity which can't possibly be coordinated in the end? I mean, where are you in that particular area?
Okay, well, this isn't my area of expertise, okay, so I may not be able to give you the very up-to-date position, but we are planning for an interim solution whilst the business case for the broader e-learning platform is processed. There will have to be an OJEC tendering process put in place. So, I mean, we're talking about at least the end of the year
6 months, isn't it?
before that can be complete. So we have to have an interim platform in place. And what we're doing at the moment, and certainly one of the problems I've had in developing my web-based learning needs assessment tool, is trying to make sure that it's built on a platform in a flexible way that will enable it to migrate into whatever it is we have in the future.
Yeah.
But a lot of work has gone into looking at what's currently available, what is likely to be available in the next couple of years, because the danger is, of course, that we will actually you know, the technology will have moved on by the time we've procured. So we're trying to future-proof what we're doing, but making it something which is robust, which is usable in the NHS, you know, because we do have issues around connectivity in the NHS and access to the technology. So all of those kind of things and its functionality have been specified now. And the process is in tray. And the other issue is resource, isn't it? I mean, you know the disparity in terms of resource from one organisation to another.
Yes.
Some people don't have access to IT, some people do.
Absolutely.
And, you know, is there any part you can play in bridging those gaps? But again, I think NHSU has to act as a kind of stimulant. With my NHS Information Authority hat on, of course, I would say that by the 31st of March 2003, that's a fortnight, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Everybody in the NHS should have access to web-based or web browser, email and directory services.
I'm sure you're going to create lots of questions coming in after that one.
We're running out of time, and I had another email from Plymouth just saying that you didn't answer question number 2, which was how are you going to measure success?
Yeah. I think that's very difficult. I'm not sure how we're going to measure success. Your ideas on a postcard, please.
Well,
what would you consider to be success for NHSU?
Well, at that point I think we'll have to call it a day because we are running out of time. So thank you very much for participation, everybody here. Thank you very much to Di Millen, Teresa Doherty, Ros Jarrett and Sue Hodgetts. And thank you all as well for your participation. The next seminar is in 1 hour's time. At 2 o'clock, Heather Skirton and others will be discussing issues around communication and genetic counselling. Next month, on April 10th, we've got one of our NICE seminars in which the NICE guidance on atypical antipsychotic medication will be discussed. So put that one in your diary too, and we look forward to your participation. Thank you very much for participating today. Goodbye.
What is a corporate university? Well, there are lots of dictionary definitions, but it may help to explain that large organisations like Barclays, the bank, Microsoft, and even McDonald's have corporate universities. Corporate universities are about providing an explicit focus on learning and development for employees and others working with a particular corporation or organisation. Learning and development focuses expressly on the aims and values of that organisation. So the NHSU will strive to support learning about NHSU culture and values. And importantly, corporate universities focus on reorientation of the business. And if we're to modernise the service, I think we all understand that changes in working practice have to take place. They're happening all the time already. So NHSU, as a corporate university, will support modernisation, will support new ways of working, new ways of doing things, and that's not just in administrative terms, but in terms of clinical care, clinical processes. Importantly, a corporate university champions investment in skills, competencies, qualities and self-esteem of staff. NHSU can be an agitator. I hope it will be. I hope it will stimulate discussion. I hope it will stimulate debate about resource, about direction of travel and about investment in human resources in terms of education, training and development. And importantly, NHSU as a corporate university has to strive to make learning normal by building it into working life. Then it will have failed to achieve a significant objective. How we measure that, of course, is another challenge for us. And you may have some views on how we might do that. And very importantly, NHSU is about unlocking people's talents and creating new learning opportunities. Learning is not just about attending courses. NHSU will encourage innovation in learning and encourage learning in the workplace in new and different ways. So, one of the important things NHSU will do, and this is radical, it's going to be difficult, but NHSU aims to include patients and carers more effectively in learning for people who work in the NHS, but also in helping to develop patients and carers in ways that we haven't done before. One of the things I think that has become clear to us as we've been holding seminars and presentations around the country, and again I'll say more about that later, is that NHSU is already appearing to be a catalyst for innovation. People are starting to think and talk about learning and development in ways that perhaps they haven't done before. People from different disciplines, from higher education, further education, the NHS and private suppliers are starting to talk about innovation in learning and how that might bring about change in learning cultures in the NHS. Now, NHSU aims to be a corporate university for the NHS, but importantly, a corporate university with a difference.
Plymouth.ac.uk. Again, just to register who's watching. I know, for example, that there should be a class of nursing students watching in Plymouth, so it would be nice to get an email from you. This will be very helpful for us so that we can make this seminar as interactive as possible. So now we go over to Di Millen, but please do be thinking of comments and questions during our presentation so that we can get your contribution when she joins us here afterwards.
Thank you very much, Ray. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to present to you today. I'm delighted to be here. I am currently on a half-time secondment working with the NHSU, helping to establish what we're calling for the time being a faculty of health informatics. My day job is actually working for the NHS Information Authority, as Ray mentioned, where I'm leading the work there on professionalism in health informatics, with a job title that's too long and boring to bother you with for now. So that's why I'm here. I'm going to talk to you about the NHSU in general, and I'm going to talk specifically a little about the health informatics offering, because that's something that clearly is dear to my heart. Before I do that, I just feel I should point out that on the opening slide this afternoon, the heading was Learning for Everyone, the NHS University. We're not a university yet. I'm going to mention that in my presentation, but we're calling ourselves NHSU, and I think that's important to point out right from the start. So, NHSU, what's it all about? Why do we need it? Well, the NHS today is modernising. None of us who work in the NHS can have avoided the fact that the NHS is modernising its services, its processes. It's using technology in new ways to enhance patient care, to improve the patient journey. And if we're going to continue to modernise and achieve the objectives set out in the National Plan and other national strategies and policies, we have to embrace learning and transformation in learning. Learning is for everybody in the NHS. There are groups of staff, and I'm sure we're all familiar with them, who in the past have not had access to learning in the same kind of way that some of the professional groups, like clinicians, have. So NHSU has to do something about improving equity in access to learning if everybody's part in improving the patient journey is to be appreciated and developed. NHSU is about helping to coordinate and encourage economies of scale. We all know that training is delivered and developed in dozens of ways across learning centres, in training departments and outside the NHS. And the NHSU has to have a role in helping to coordinate that and to bring about some kind of benefit from economy of scale. So NHSU is going to be about supporting the priorities of the NHS as a whole. It's about, and we must never forget this of course, contributing to the systematic improvement of patient care. If NHSU doesn't do that,
Good afternoon and welcome to another Institute of Health Studies satellite seminar. I'm Ray Jones, Director of Research for the Institute of Health Studies, and with me in the University of Plymouth TV studios today we're very pleased to welcome Di Millen from the NHS Information Authority. She's working with and will be talking about the NHSU. We also welcome Teresa Doherty, who is NHSU Assistant Divisional Head for the South West region, who's come to join Di in the discussion. In the studio with Di and Teresa, we also have Ros Jowett from the Institute of Health Studies and Sue Hodgetts from the Workforce Development Confederation, who will introduce themselves when we come to the discussion. Similarly, I will not say any more about Di Millen just now, but leave her to explain her role within her presentation. We're hoping that we will have an audience in various parts of the South West and perhaps in other parts of the country, such as Nottingham and Glasgow. Well, we can't be sure you're there, so while Di is giving her presentation, I would like someone from your site to phone the studio on 01752 233 646. That telephone number will be given again later. Don't worry about the phone ringing down here, it won't. You'll get through to Dave or Zoe, your colleagues in the control room, and you can just say, for example, this is Nottingham watching and we've got 8 people here. Or you can email me directly. I have a laptop in front of me, and tell me that you're there on tvstudio@